safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, March 8th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Aaron Kleinman, Director of Research for the States Project at Future Now. The future of Wisconsin. Also, what some of these special elections may portend for the future. A lot of future involved in this. Meanwhile, also on the program today, Peter Shamshari, or as you may know him, Lawboy on Twitter, co-host of the 5-4 podcast, will be here to talk about a couple of recent oral arguments in front of the Supreme Court and a third case to be addressed by the court. Meanwhile, more video of the Tyree Nichols killing to be released today as the Department of Justice announces it will investigate the Memphis police. Biden releases more details for his budget. More taxes on the wealthy as a deficit reduction plan. Meanwhile, speaking of the deficit, Congress and Biden are planning a record-breaking defense budget. So much for those deficit concerns. Senate Republicans slammed Tucker Carlson for his January 6th whiter washing. Yep.
The Tucker cut.
That's what I did. Fed chief vows to end economic progress and labor power with increased rates. Bernie Sanders secures Howard Schultz's testimony in a couple of weeks in front of his help committee, now seeking some from other corporate behemoths. Chuck Schumer announces he's going to vote yes to attack the sovereignty of Washington, D.C. Oklahoma says no to legal weed.
Oklahoma.
Nice. The FTC demands information from Twitter, including info on which and what journalists received that Twitter dump. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. It is Hump Day. I have received a special license to say that today. Obviously, got to pay my cash to Emma Vigeland, who is on. She's not feeling well, so I get to say Hump Day. It's worth it. Worth the trade off because generally it costs a lot more for me to say that because it is, of course, trademarked because she, of course, did coin that phrase. And if you got a problem with that, send an email. I'd like to read it. A couple of things. I want to get to this interest rate stuff because the Fed is just relentless. New jobs are slated to come out Friday. We don't know what they are, but the private jobs report put out by ADP, economists will often make predictions as to what that's going to be, and they got it wrong. The jobs report's still strong coming from ADP. We'll get to that in a moment. I also just want to say something about this FTC investigation of Twitter. Maybe I'll get to that in a bit as well. But the shorts form, the too long don't read story, is that Twitter is under a consent decree from fall of 2022 because of their massive data leak. The Federal Trade Commission protects consumers' privacy. Twitter was under a consent decree that required them to have people like the guy they fired from the DOJ that was everybody was up in arms about. That guy was a compliance guy whose one of his jobs was to make sure that Twitter was complying with the consent decree from the Federal Trade Commission to protect the privacy of its users. Twitter fired him. Twitter gave access, and we really don't know what kind of access was given, because supposedly you could see accounts that were supposedly shadow banned. Right? I mean, we were told this by all the Twitter file publicists, journalists. But the FTC has them under a consent decree to protect the privacy of users. That means if you're going to share information with third parties, the FTC has asked for it. They have done this in the past. In terms of you can't share information with third parties that you're not going to share with us when you're under a consent decree. Now, some people could take issue with that and think that's authoritarian. This is not a national security issue. It's an issue of privacy for its users. And
what
frankly,
obligations companies have towards users.
Yes. And, we're going to be talking about this is going to come up in this Section 230 court case a little bit. But I mean, without a doubt, we need Congress to require more out of these companies. But so the FTC doing this, it's not, there's always an issue when you are dealing with journalists. They're in government, always should be. And it should be extremely transparent as to what the FTC is asking and for what reasons. But what's also important is not to jump to some knee-jerk conclusions that this is some type of politically motivated attack. They were under a consent decree from before Elon Musk was there because they were crappy when it comes to privacy. And the only people who are writing about it are the sort of the aggrieved people who are now convinced that they are, they're all Daniel Ellsbergs because they published some emails that Elon Musk asked them to publish.
Yeah. It's Pentagon Papers all over again.
Exactly. But turning to the Fed, Jerome Powell made clear on Tuesday, according to the New York Times, that the central bank is prepared to react to recent signs of economic strength by raising interest rates higher than previously expected. And if incoming data remains hot, and hot is a rather subjective term, because if they're talking about 275,000 jobs, that's great. But that's not necessarily means that the economy is running too hot. Potentially returning to a quicker pace of rate increases. They have raised the rates in the fastest pace since the 1980s, pushing borrowing costs above 4.5% from near zero. That initially seemed to be slowing consumer and business demand and helping inflation to moderate. There is no signs that inflation is going. It's just that inflation has not weakened as much as expected last year, although I don't know if it was expected. It just hasn't weakened as much as at the rate in which the Fed wants. But it's we still have a situation where wage gains are going faster than inflation. That's what they're worried about, is the wage gains, if you ask me. And I would suggest if you asked Elizabeth Warren. Here is Elizabeth Warren at the Senate Banking Committee yesterday asking Fed Reserve Chair Jay Powell just how much damage is he willing to do to people's jobs to presumably save people?
According to the Fed's own report, if you continue raising interest rates as you plan, unemployment will be 4.6% by the end of the year, more than a full point higher than it is today. Chair Powell, if you hit your projections, do you know how many people who are currently working, going about their lives, will lose their jobs?
I don't have that number in front of me. I will say it's not an intended consequence.
But it is, and it's in your report, and that would be about 2 million people who would lose their jobs. People who are working right now, making their mortgages.
Pause it for 1 second. I want you to just contemplate this. The Fed has supposedly a dual mandate. That is to constrain inflation and to provide as much employment as possible. They have set out, he has explicitly said, we need to soften the labor market. Explicitly said we need to attack labor and attack the number of jobs. Very sensitive about the implications of inflation. But when asked exactly like how many millions of people, like actual human beings, are going to lose their job under your stated plan, remember, 2 mandates. And for a long time, people should understand this. I don't know when they stopped. Maybe it was like sometime over the past 5 or 6, 7, 10 years. But 20 years ago, these people were all convinced and told us that there was a rate of unemployment you could not go below without the entire economy crashing to the floor. And that was something like 6%. We got down to half that and no problem. And there isn't anybody out there who thinks that the main driver of inflation this go round has become because there's too much money sloshing around. And it's not because of wage increases, because up until very recently, inflation was at a higher rate than wages. It was because of supply lines. It was because of logistics. It was because of shutdowns in production, not because we didn't have the productive capacity, but because we had literally had to shut down the factories because massive COVID in China. And this guy's in charge of 2 things: inflation and jobs. And he can't even tell like what the goal is in terms of human beings, only in terms of a percentage point. This is the mentality that they're dealing with here. 2 million people are going to lose their jobs under his plan purposely. That's the point. And he doesn't even know that number. Now he says it's not direct. Well, of course it's not direct. You're not going to go and fire each one of them. You're just going to make it harder for businesses to have the money to hire them. And you know that, and that's why you're doing it. It's explicit in their plans. All right, go back a little bit.
Or currently working, going about their lives, will lose their jobs?
I don't have that number in front of me. I will say it's not an intended consequence.
But it is, and it's in your report, and that would be about 2 million people who would lose their jobs. People who are working right now, making their mortgages. So Chair Powell, if you could speak directly to the 2 million hardworking people who have decent jobs today, who you're planning to get fired over the next year, what would you say to them? How would you explain your view that they need to lose their jobs?
I would explain to people more broadly that inflation is extremely high and it's hurting the working people of this country badly. All of them, not just 2 million of them, but all of them are suffering under high inflation, and we are taking the only measures we have to bring inflation down.
And putting 2 million people out of work is just part of the cost, and they just have to bear it?
Will working people be better off if we just walk away from our jobs and inflation remains 5-6%?
Let me ask you about what happens if you do this. Since the end of World War II, there have been 12 times in which the unemployment rate has increased by 1 percentage point within 1 year, exactly what you're aiming to do right now. How many of those times did the U.S. economy avoid falling into a recession?
It's not as black and white as very,
Just
very
looking at the
infrequent.
numbers, it actually is pretty black
Alan
and white.
Blinder's written a book on this.
There have been 12 times that we've seen a 1-point increase in the unemployment rate in a year. That's exactly what your Fed report has put out as the projection and the plan based on how you're going to keep raising these interest rates. How many times did the economy fail to fall into a recession after doing that? Out of 12 times.
I think the number is 0.
I think the number is 0. That's exactly right.
You know what? Really is concerning about inflation to these guys is that your loan that you took at a rate that is several percentages lower than the rate is today. That inflation makes your paying back that loan easier. Wages have gone up. Your loan is at a fixed rate, assuming it's at a fixed rate, which a lot of those are. That means it's easier for you to pay off that loan. He's protecting the banks. He's not protecting working people. I mean, it's, this is the idea that it's the only thing the Fed can do. That may be the case, but that doesn't mean it's the most effective thing to do, or it's even effective.
Yeah, or useful. Yeah, I mean, the real thing that needs to be done is things like automatic stabilizers, like expanded universal SNAP, maybe, or something like that.
Automatic stabilizers to help people on welfare, but also there's things called price controls. And if you want, even wage controls. I know this because I was alive when Richard Nixon, the Republican, imposed them. And so the idea that necessarily just because the only instrument that the Fed has is to raise or lower rates, it's got to go one direction or another. And what we've seen is that as supply lines get repaired, we see prices going down. Don't tell me about eggs. I get it. But there's the bird flu. I buy eggs. I buy milk every week, multiple times a week on the milk. The kids drink too much milk. But the point is, you're not going to get the price of eggs lowered because you're throwing 1 million, 2 million people out of work. That's not going to happen. All right, in a minute, we'll be talking to Aaron Kleinman, Director of Research for the States Project of Future Now, about this huge race in Wisconsin, but also the special elections around the country that we've seen and what they might be telling us about what's going to happen in 2024. One of our sponsors, Henson Shaving. Henson Shaving is a family-owned aerospace parts manufacturer that has made parts for the International Space Station and the Mars rover, and now they're bringing their precision engineering to your shaving experience. Look, I have not been doing a tremendous amount of shaving over the past year because of the beard. I shave really in 4 places on my face. Here, 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 and here. Very little. So for me, I didn't want to I didn't need a subscription anymore. I didn't want to have a bunch of different cartridges and stuff like this. Henson Shaving, it is, the beauty is not just in its shaver, it's beautiful actually, but also in its simplicity. But it also turns out to be in their engineering. The discomfort that men and women experience when shaving with disposable razors apparently is due not to the sharpness of the blade, but to the length in which the blade extends from the actual razor. Apparently, razor blades are like diving boards. The longer the board, the more wobble and the more nicks and cuts and scrapes you get. Bad shave turns out not to be a blade problem, it's an extension problem. They have aerospace grade CNC machines. These are like computer, I don't know what, they're computer functioning machines. Henson makes metal razors that extend just 0.0013 inches, which is less than the thickness of a human hair. That means a secure and stable blade with a vibration-free shave. Gets better. This, you can see this right here. The razor has built-in channels that evacuate hair. So no more banging on the side of your sink. No more trying to run it in there. No more putting your thumb across there and getting a cut. It drives me crazy. I can't think about it. And the thing about Henson shaving that I like is that they set out to have the best razor, not the best razor business. So you buy it once and you are done. There is no plastic. There are no subscriptions. There's no proprietary blades. There's no planned obsolescence. They use standard dual edge blades. Give you that old school razor shave with the benefits of new tech. Once you own a Henson razor, it's only about $3 to $5 per year to replace the blades. For me, it's honestly like, I don't know. We're talking pennies because I shave like such a small portion of my face. But they're giving you a 2-year supply of blades for free. Just go to hensonshaving.com/majority. That's HENSON shaving.com/majority. Add a razor and a 100 pack of blades to your cart. So you got to do it separately. You do the razor, then you go back 100 blades to your cart, enter the code majority. You're going to get the blades for free. You're done. Probably until, I don't know, a decade, essentially. The link is in the description. Check them out too. They've got two different types. They've actually got 3 different types of razors. One, depending on how much you shave and what kind of shaving you do. If you wait like a week, you might want the other one. I can't remember what this one is. The ML13. I can't remember, but check it out. Also, they got different colors. I got a black one. It really is cool. Other sponsor today. Also something I use on a daily basis. Plastic is a huge problem, as you know. It's everywhere we look. And not enough is being done to diminish the amount of plastic. They outlawed plastic bags from like bodegas in New York City, and that's a start. But the amount of plastic that we produce every day in this country is enormous. It's only 40% of all the plastic that's been that is in the country, that is in the world right now, has been made in the past 18 years. Single-use plastic, the worst. Ends up in the ocean, killing fish, killing animals, wildlife. It stays in your landfills forever. Well, Hold On is a company born from the idea that there's a much better way to go about our daily chores. They have trash bags, they have kitchen bags, which are necessary staples, but Hold On understands they don't have to be 100% plastic. Hold On trash and kitchen bags are heavy-duty, plant-based, non-toxic, and 100% home compostable, which means that they break down in weeks, not decades. They don't fill up our landfills. They don't destroy our oceans. Their zip seal kitchen bags come in sandwich or gallon-sized bags, fits all your needs. Sandwiches for the kids, crayons, in my case, Legos, random Lego pieces, lock pick set. Hold On wants to be part of a growing movement away from single-use plastic, like I've said, is the worst. At every stage, production, disposal, decomposition, plastic bags are just a nightmare. Hold On bags are made from non-toxic ingredients and plant-based renewables. Hold On trash and kitchen bags meet the highest standards of compostability. Like I say, they break down in weeks. I have gone almost completely Hold On for everything, for the kitchen bag, for the tall kitchen bags, for the smaller ones that I use for the cat poop and, what do you call it? Litter, and for the kids. And you can do so right now. Shop plant-based bags and replace single-use plastics all over your home. Visit holdonbags.com/majority or enter majority at checkout to save 20% off your order. Sustainability has never been more simple. That's holdonbags/majority. HOLDON bags.com/majority or enter majority to receive 20% off to get 20% off your order. Small things can lead to lasting change. If we stop and say, hold on. Thank you, Hold On, for sponsoring the program and my getting rid of all my cat poop in my house. Links will be in the podcast and YouTube description. Quick break. We'll be back with Aaron Kleinman. It's like we actually called each other to see what we could have matching stuff. Folks, it is a pleasure to welcome back to the program Aaron Kleinman, Director of Research for States Project at Future Now. Bobby Big Wheel on Twitter. Always fun for me to say that. Aaron, good to see you again.
Oh, it's always fun for me to hear that, especially now that it's a dying platform. And so I don't have to worry about being called that anymore.
It is, you're going to, whatever it is that, I don't know where we're going to all go, but.
It's like a dying mall. We're all just kind of doing kickflips outside at an abandoned Sam Goody.
Yeah, it's true, actually. It's like a big skateboard park now on some level. All right, well, let's get to this quick. There's two things I want to talk to you about. I want to talk about Wisconsin, and then I just want to talk about, to the extent that we can, what can we glean from some of the special elections we've seen. But the last time we had an election for a state Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin was, if I remember correctly, coincidental with the primary in 2020.
That's right.
In Wisconsin. And Bernie Sanders stayed in that primary in Wisconsin. And a lot of people wondering why he did that. And I'm quite convinced that part of the reason was to help Wisconsin in that election. And it did seem to help. But tell us what's at stake and who's running and what we're looking at when this election is.
Yeah, also that election, it was kind of a weird one too, because it was in the first few weeks of the pandemic. So nobody really knew how to run an election. So it was an odd one. So in Wisconsin, the state Supreme Court is elected statewide. Seats open up every 10 years, and they have elections in April. So this April 4th, there's going to be an election for a seat that's being vacated by a conservative. And there are two candidates, Daniel Kelly, an election denier who worked for the Trump campaign in 2020, far-right guy who lost that 2020 election, and Janet, her last name, I think it's Protasewicz. Please.
I'll tell you something. I really appreciate it. She's running, all of her campaign stuff is Judge Janet. And it's because her last name is I'm glad you attempted it, because I can't even tell you how many different ways I butcher that.
Janet P. Running, and she's, going to stand up for, democracy, reproductive health, the things that are very important. And Wisconsin's court could flip from not supporting those things to supporting those things. So if you want to think about the ramifications for that, They have a law in the books from before the Civil War that bans abortion. Right now it's kind of in the midst of litigation. So the makeup of the court has massive ramifications for whether that law will still apply. You also have Wisconsin. I am comfortable saying it has the most gerrymandered state legislative maps in the country. If you have a majority on that court that supports democracy, you could see litigation to have new maps in place. So the stakes of that Supreme Court election are huge. The parties are spending millions of dollars on it. And, I think it kind of relates to the second thing you want to talk about, Sam, which is special elections. And
okay. But I want to say, when you say like it is supportive of democracy, will you just go through that? I mean, because, people, I know that there are people in our audience who are like supportive of democracy. Come on. This is the most explicit anti-democratic gerrymander that you could possibly have. It is literally like, if you wanted to explain to somebody why gerrymandering can be anti-democratic, you would go to Wisconsin and look at this breakdown. Explain this to us.
Yeah, I mean, a fair map for a majority of seats in Wisconsin would basically be, you'd think that, the party winning statewide would win a majority of seats. I mean,
that's close. I can imagine that there's like concentrations of Democrats and Republicans in certain areas, and statewide it might be close. Yeah,
but you also want to make sure that the parties are both accountable to really the whims of the majority. And there has to be at least, the potential for either, in a close state like Wisconsin, where, every election's within a few points, you'd want either party to have the potential to win a majority, but today in Wisconsin, the Democratic Party would have to win the statewide vote by, I think, around like 15 points to have a shot at a majority in the legislature.
So to be clear, 65% of Wisconsinites could vote, or 64% of Wisconsinites
more like 58%.
Okay.
58. So they win like 58 to 42.
Okay. 58% of Wisconsinites would have to vote for the Democratic Party, and 42% vote for the Republicans for it to be 50-50 in the Senate.
Or close to it, yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
All right. And so I guess for you, it's not. It doesn't seem to be as dramatic.
I mean, I've been staring in this in the face for years. So, that's how it is. And like you tell it to people, and they get really mad, and it's like, yeah, that's what we got to do. That's what we've been dealing with for more than a decade in Wisconsin. But for the first time in more than a decade, you could have a state Supreme Court there that, like I said, supports democracy, which means that they would. You could sue to overturn those maps because, they are not a Republican form of government. They don't guarantee, equal rights to people to select their representatives. All sorts of reasons why they shouldn't be valid. And someone could sue to replace them with maps that actually would help the legislature reflect the will of the people of the state. And to be clear,
that Republican-controlled legislature has done things like a Democrat wins the governorship. We're going to strip the governorship of all these powers that they had for generations. I mean, healthcare. I mean, on and on and on.
And also you want to talk about the legislature. At the same time, there will be a special election for a vacant state Senate seat. And it's a seat that kind of leans a few points Republican, but you have a very extreme right-wing candidate who they nominated, who tried to throw out the 2020 results. We saw a lot of those candidates flounder a bit in 2022. And if they win a supermajority there, the legislature would have the power under those gerrymandered maps to impeach and remove non-legislative officials. And if you think about the ramifications for that, Democrat, a majority of the people of the state wanted a Democratic governor. They could remove any of his appointees they didn't like. They could even go after the court itself. It would be it would be a pretty egregious, and it could backfire. But it's one of those things where we've seen really kind of drastic right-wing attacks on popular democracy in Wisconsin, and so we certainly don't want to rule it out. Right. And so there's that state Senate race, which is actually really important as well. so we can really kind of help protect that court and make sure that it's kind of free to rule as the kind of with the principles of fairness and equality for everyone. So.
All right. Yeah. So we're talking about special elections. Give us a sense of like where we're at. Now, we should say there's a caveat here, right? Special elections don't tell us everything we want to know about the future, but they give some indication at least of where we are relative in terms of like level of enthusiasm, who's coming out, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And so it's very drastic kind of what happened, because if you look at special elections, basically from after the 2020 election until the leak of the Dobbs decision, they tended to lean Republican. Seriously, the Dobbs decision leaked on a Monday. The next day, Tuesday, May 3rd, Democrats flipped a Michigan State House seat that supported Trump by like 14 points. And since then, Democrats have tended to overperform in special elections. Again, like you said, that's not necessarily predictive for a general election, though it is a data point. But it really shows you that in a lot of these kind of oddly timed elections, like ones in odd years, there may be a turnout advantage because people really understand the stakes for what's going on in state government in a lot of these elections. And so even though like in Wisconsin, it's a pretty evenly divided state, I think if you look at kind of they had a primary last month, and it showed that there was more enthusiasm on the liberal side. And then, and so similarly, we were hoping kind of with this state legislative election too, even though the seat leans a few points Republican, that kind of special election differential maybe could help us really narrow that gap and hopefully break the supermajority.
And it sounds like your kid is a Republican, not happy about these numbers.
He's not happy about how gerrymandered that state is.
Oh, he's getting still pissed about Wisconsin.
I've given him the talk about Jerry.
Oh, he's given the talk about Wisconsin. Yeah. All right. Well, do we have a sense of like who's coming out in these special elections? Right. And because we should say the broad premise is off-year elections have up until really 2018 favored Republicans, generally speaking. You do get like, the opposing the party that is out of the presidency generally overperforms in off-year elections, but Republicans generally overperform Democrats, broadly speaking, but even in those circumstances. But 18 and 20 seems to be a different. I mean, I should say 18 and 22 seem to be different. Do we know who was coming out in these special elections, or is this we don't have data on that?
I mean, because special elections, it's kind of scattershot as to where they are. We don't, but the trends that you see show that, particularly in areas with like more educated people, again, the new coalition for the Democratic Party, you're seeing people who tend to have higher turnout rate, like the voters who tended to just turn out for every election, who tend to be high information voters, they really, there's an advantage into having them as part of your coalition, because in a special election, in an election in an odd year, they're more likely to come out. And so there is a bit of an advantage there. And so it's one of those things we're looking to see if that trend continues, because I think it really speaks to not just kind of who's in power, who's not, but kind of who's making up your political coalition, and kind of how, there's a bit of a curve where it's like, you have the lowest turnout elections, you have like a midterm, then you have a presidential, and there's kind of different electorates for each of those. And while, and so there may be a case where it's like for, a midterm election, that coalition maybe is not like the best, but for kind of a low turnout and a presidential, maybe that coalition can really come through for you. So it's something to just kind of keep our eyes on as well, but also be mindful of the fact that like the stakes here are just huge as well, in addition to kind of understanding what's going on in the country. And
do you have a sense of the youth vote? They seem to have overperformed in 18 and 22.
Yeah, if you look at the primary, Dane County, which is the home to University of Wisconsin, had great turnout. and that's not just college. You think about youth vote. Sometimes people think it's colleges, but also, kind of out of college as well. Madison in particular, attracts young people from all over, not just students. So, there are promising signs out of Dane County, to be sure. But it's kind of hard to parse out for special elections just because you tend to have a pretty common age, makeup of most districts across the country.
What's the best way for me to support the election of this Supreme Court, potential Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin right now?
Well, obviously she has her campaign, Janet P. And, it's really important. Parties are spending millions on it. So we want to kind of help focus as well on the less expensive, but just, very important state Senate race as well. And so we're running our Give Smart campaign at futurenow.org. And so that provides a real, again, who knows what the future may hold, but Republicans have certainly made threats of impeachment and removal. And so we want to kind of prevent against that. And so if you're worried about that potential of them going to extremes, check it out at futurenow.org or at statesproject.org. Or, again, there's the Dying Mall of Twitter. You can follow me on there at Bobby Big Wheel.
All right. Aaron Kleiman, always a pleasure. Really appreciate it. Folks, if you're in Wisconsin, if you know people in Wisconsin, tell them to get out and vote for that Supreme Court race. Really important. And if you are inclined, help support this challenge to this Senate seat, because it could have big implications. Aaron Kleiman, really appreciate it. We'll put the links in the podcast and YouTube description.
All right. Thank you. Thanks. Care, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, folks, going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Peter Shamshari. He is Lawboy on Twitter and also the co-host of the 5-4 podcast. Be right back. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma is out today. Joining us again, welcome back to the program, Peter Shamshiri, Lawboy on Twitter, the Dying Mall that we've been told, the Dying Mall by Bobby Big Wheel, and co-host of the 5-4 podcast, which I guess, did you guys ever contemplate changing your name after it became 6'3"?
No, but everyone tells us that we should. Our position has always been that the 5-4 is more of a symbolic sort of thing. It's not really about the split per se, although we had to really dig in our heels on the symbolic element after it became 6-3.
There you go. All right. Well, and it's also, I guess, hopeful in some way. But anyways. All right. So 3 cases I want to talk to you about, 2 of which have heard oral arguments. The third has just been sort of accepted for review by the Supreme Court. We'll get to that in a moment. But let's start with student loans. Start, if you will, with the legal authority in which, because there's some controversy about what legal authority the Biden administration chose to use, because they had options to essentially offer this student loan debt relief, $10,000 per person under $125,000, $20,000 if it was from a Pell Grant. We should just say something like this is going to impact like something like 45 million people or so, somewhere around there, and 16 million already had theirs approved. Another 16 million were already in the system. Nobody's gotten their loans because of this lawsuit. go from there, Peter.
Sure. Yeah. So the Biden administration has chosen to use the HEROES Act as their authority for forgiving the loans. The HEROES Act is a 2003 law that authorizes them to waive or modify any statutory or regulatory provision applicable to the student loan program in emergency situations. So it's sort of tied to the fact that the pandemic impacted everyone's economic situation, and that is why they're doing it. This is the authority they used also to pause loan payments, and it seems sort of in line with their current philosophy that they're sort of angling it as a pandemic thing. There was the option of going with the Higher Education Act of 1965, which is not tied to emergencies and also sort of has this sort of broad language saying that they can forfeit any right to related to the loan program. So they had multiple options. They went with the sort of pandemic-oriented HEROES Act.
Now, let me just say this. As a political matter and a policy matter, I would have preferred them to do the latter because, and I'm quite convinced they did the former because they wanted it to be a special thing and they didn't want to give anybody any ideas for the future. It's almost in the same way that the Democrats said, we're going to pay for free Cobra as opposed to having people be in Medicare, even if it was temporarily, because they didn't want to give anybody any ideas. But putting that aside, my preference would have been, let's just use the authority that exists there and test that as opposed to this emergency authority. Putting that aside, let's talk about it from a legal standpoint. And then we'll get to the standing of the parties, et cetera. But when they went to the court and we heard the oral arguments, did we hear anything from the justices that they took issue with the definition of an emergency, right? Like it was an emergency in 2020 when Trump paused these loans, but it's not really an emergency today. And B, did those justices or any of the justices reference the other authority that the Biden administration could be operating under?
Yeah, so they actually didn't really make a big stink about it in oral argument. People thought that they might, especially because the administration is saying that the emergency is ending. The administration has sort of waffled on other issues, like the impact of the emergency on immigration policy, for example. It was something that certain amicus briefs touched on, basically saying they're trying to have it both ways. The emergency is over, but it's not over. The Biden administration's response to that had always been, this is still related to the emergency because the economic impact lingers. And I think that argument resonated. And so no one at the court seemed to be particularly convinced. And I also think that from the justice's perspective, you can sort of see that they feel like they don't need to go there in sort of arguing about the gray area of what an emergency is, where it ends. That is a lot trickier from their perspective than just ignoring that and arguing about the merits. Does the Secretary of Education have the authority to do this? So they didn't really confront it much. There were only passing references to other authorities. And in large part, they focused on, besides the standing issue, which, as you referenced, was really the big issue. They really focused on the language of the statute and the major questions doctrine, which has been haunting administrative agencies for the last few years.
Okay, so let's return to that aspect of it, because that becomes a Chevron doctrine versus the major questions doctrine fight, and we'll return to that in a second and go to the standings, because I want to when we return to that Chevron doctrine, major questions doctrine question, I want to both address like the way that they're approaching it and talk about how ridiculous the major questions doctrine is, but whether or not that could have also been deployed against the other law, because at the end of the day, the major questions doctrine is designed to basically say, we get to decide. regardless of what it is. All right, so let's get to standing. There are two cases here. One is brought by 6 states or 7 states.
6 states, right?
And one is brought by 2 people. Let's start with the 2 people one, because that one everybody seems to think is an absolute joke.
That is my position. I think that they have a really sort of ludicrous claim to standing. I mean, standing, again, is just this legal idea that to bring a lawsuit, you need to have been injured. And courts have always held that that injury needs to be something relatively discreet and direct. What they're claiming is essentially, well, we didn't get loan forgiveness. We didn't qualify for the loan forgiveness that we wanted under the Biden program, and we want it. And other people got it. And so is that not an injury? And the reason that people think that this is silly is because there's, just a sort of common sense difference between being injured and not receiving a benefit that someone else received. But that's sort of the heart of their claim here. They're making like a technical procedural argument at the bottom of it, asking for notice and comment. But I mean, the heart of their standing claim is it just doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah.
Hey, and if I remember, I mean, I had 1 year of law school, so I did take civil procedure. And if I remember, you also need to be pursuing a relief or a remedy that is going to deal with the injury that you have gotten. Right. So, if I get hit by a car and I break my leg, I need some cash because one of the things I've suffered is not only all my medical bills, but maybe I have future potential earnings. So I want cash, and that cash is going to deal with it. They're going in there and arguing the bill is we are injured because we don't qualify for these things. I didn't get a Pell Grant, I think, in one instance, or my loan was from a private company, not the government. And so the remedy, the way to fix this is to give no one any debt relief. Wasn't this one of the big issues too in the moot court? Like you said, I can't remember which justice said, you've come in here.
I think it was Kagan who basically said, even if we sort of grant that you're injured, what you're asking for is functionally to halt this program. So how does that help you at all? You're now no one gets anything. And is that really a remedy to the problem, to the injury that you're claiming? Their response was sort of this vague, well, what we really want at the end of the day is for the Biden administration to scrap this program and then reconsider one that would maybe potentially benefit us. So they have that sort of tenuous roundabout argument to say that they are in fact seeking a remedy that would help them, but it's the only remedy that they're actually seeking is for the Biden administration to scrap the program. So yeah, it just doesn't make much sense.
So let's go to the other, and keeping in mind those 3 elements of that you need for standing, which is a direct harm and a remedy that's going to redress your thing, and a direct, an obvious injury and a direct connection to what the government did in that injury and a redress. We have these 7 states or 6 states, and they also got a problem here too with that, it seems. But go ahead, explain.
Yeah. So the states they have their own little claims to injury in each case, but the most interesting one, the one that most of the argument focused on, was Missouri's. Missouri has their own state student loan authority, MOHELA, I think is the acronym. And what they're claiming is that program, that authority, is injured because the forgiveness will result in debt holders consolidating their outstanding debt, which will take money away from the state loan authority. And the state loan authority provides their revenue to the state's higher education fund at the end of the day. So you have somewhere downstream of loan forgiveness is less money in state coffers. And that is sort of the Missouri argument. There are a couple of problems with this. One is it's a daisy chain to get there, right? It's not really a direct injury. they haven't done a ton to show that they know for sure this will happen or to what extent it will happen. The other problem, and this is really probably the biggest problem for them, is that MOHELA, the state loan authority, is a separate legal entity that governs itself to a degree, and could, if it wanted to, bring this lawsuit on its own behalf, and in fact brings lawsuits from time to time on its own behalf in other matters. And so what the court brought up, I think it was Amy Coney Barrett actually, who brought this up, was, well, this isn't really you who's being injured, right? This isn't really Missouri. You have this separately legally incorporated entity. They didn't want to bring this lawsuit, so why are you standing in for them? And Missouri had a sort of roundabout response again, where they said, well, they're sort of an arm of the state. And Amy Coney Barrett fired back, well, then you could have made them sue, right? And they didn't have a great response for that. And again, I think this is the state with the best claim to standing here.
Right.
So it is very shaky, although some of the conservatives, especially Alito, seemed very willing to just sort of hand wave this away as like a legal formality, something that's sort of beside the point at the end of the day. But, the other states have even weaker sort of positions here. They're claiming that one day in the future, in a couple of years, they're going to start taxing the discharge of student loan debts by the federal government. And so this is denying them that tax revenue. It's all very tenuous. The only thing that they have going for them is that historically courts have been relatively lenient on states in these situations. That said, it's also been sort of long rejected, the idea that states can just challenge federal policies by pointing to their tax revenue. Because if that was enough to grant standing, any state could really challenge any federal policy. Almost all federal policies are going to have some sort of impact on tax revenue at the end of the day. So the conservatives on the court, with the exception of Amy Coney Barrett, I think seemed pretty willing to entertain this. But as far as traditional standing analysis goes, it didn't seem like they had anything. It's
super dodgy, it seems to me. I mean, super dodgy. And so getting past the standing thing, which really should be the thing that kills this, right?
Yeah.
And it does seem like the Biden administration almost relied on that on some level. They're like, in fact, they made some changes in September. They got rid of they sort of skirted around the private administration of the private servicing of loans, so that they could avoid, the standing that might come from like a company that actually services and says, we're losing money because we take a fee on that 10 grand and we're losing money. They eliminated that aspect of it to avoid the standing. That seems to be their legal strategy, was that this is going to die on the vine because of standing.
Absolutely. I think that, as a lot of people have criticized them for going in a little bit sloppy using the HEROES Act, they did this now classic Biden administration thing where last summer they were talking about how they weren't sure that this was legal, and then they try it anyway. And so then, you get to hold their own words against them.
Right.
But the one thing you can give them credit for here is I do think that they were laser focused on building a program that would be difficult to challenge from this perspective. I think it was as the program was being announced, Ted Cruz was tweeting, look, we're trying to sue, but we need a theory of standing first. And I think that's as good of an admission as you'll ever see from the conservative legal movement, that the Biden administration created a real problem here for them. So I do think it was a big part of their strategy. I do think that it was sort of the spearhead, because they knew that if it gets through to the court on the merits, they're probably in trouble.
And based upon let's get to the merits, because this is the difference between the Chevron doctrine and the major questions doctrine. Will you explain to people, I mean, hopefully at least a significant portion of our audience at this point understands what the Chevron doctrine is and the major questions doctrine. I would consider it an abject failure on my part if they didn't at this point. But that aside, will you just explain these two principles? Yeah. Because one is really, it seems to me, I mean, the major questions doctrine is basically just like, you and what army are going to do anything about it? We're going to decide this way, and we could do it on anything.
Yeah. So the Chevron doctrine is this idea that when you're interpreting administrative agency action, when you're trying to figure out if an administrative agency is working within the scope of their allocated power, the power allocated to them by Congress, you generally defer to the agency itself. That was sort of the rule until a few years ago, with very minor exceptions. The major questions doctrine is something that this court has made prominent, where they basically say, we're no longer going to defer to agencies on issues of vast economic and political significance, which I think to them means like whatever Fox News thinks is a big deal. I mean, that's honestly my read on it. It's sort of, it's something that lacks any clear direction. They don't have any like objective criteria for what that means.
But like, could they? Because isn't it almost definitionally, like a federal government agency, really, like, I mean, unless they're just like, how many staplers should we have in the office? They're going to be deciding something that's going to have major implications for society, right? I mean, it's just a joke. And we should say, not only has this court embraced it, it just sort of came up out of nowhere in the past like 15 years. It didn't exist.
Right. I mean, it traces back to a 2000 case where the court just sort of used this language in a case about the FDA. It quickly became irrelevant because Congress passed a statute. And then it was functionally dormant until maybe 2 years ago, and really hit its stride in the eviction moratorium case, and all the pandemic. Basically, the pandemic related rulemaking is when the court jumped into action about this. It is. I don't want to get too cute with it. It's made up, right? I mean, the entire concept is too vague to have any meaning. It's just an excuse for the court to be able to step in when they have policy concerns. And I think you can see that in the oral argument. They're having these arguments about policy, about whether the policy is fair, which is just so far beyond the scope of what should be the court's analysis here. And so I think that's what's happening at the end of the day. They didn't like how much authority the executive branch was getting using the Chevron doctrine. And so they created an exception and just blew a hole in it.
And we should say that they don't make an argument about the merits of deciding whether it's an emergency. That would have been very tough, particularly we still have stuff that 9/11, frankly, implicates 20 years later. There's no emergency associated with 9/11 anymore, but the things that came out of that emergency still are valid. Like you say there, and just to be clear for people, when you say that they're arguing policy, they're arguing whether this is a good idea or not, or whether it's fair, not whether it's legal. And up until really it became 5-4 conservative, there was this whole concept that we just got hammered on, like judicial activism, which was sort of a made up concept. But to the extent that it exists anywhere, it should be that like the policy, like, the only time that you consider whether it's good policy is if its implications run afoul of the Constitution, right? That's the only time that you're supposed to consider policy, is not sort of like itself as to whether it's fair or good or this and that. It's that the outcomes it generates, would those run afoul of a legal principle? And they're not doing any of that here.
No, I mean, even given what this court has done in these cases so far, this oral argument was particularly focused on just whether they thought this was a good idea. You had Sam Alito basically hammering home, is this fair? What about someone who runs who didn't go to college but runs a small company and they're not getting any assistance? How do you justify that? Even by the standards of Sam Alito, I think people who were our court watchers were sort of caught off guard by just how politics and policy driven the questions got at certain times. John Roberts was asking,
and we should say the solicitor, the representing the government, responded by saying, "Well, Congress passed a law that empowered the Secretary of Education to do this. They didn't pass a law that empowered anybody else to relieve the loans of a lawn care business." And that's the point, right? Like, these guys are like,
that's the whole point.
What does the law say? And they just have an issue. They did this frankly with the Voting Rights Act in 2013. They said, Congress voted for it, but they didn't really mean it. And I guess the point here is, had the Biden administration, based upon what we heard in this moot court, had the Biden administration used a different authority, specifically the Higher Education Act of 1965, which says the Secretary of Education has the same power that he has under the HEROES Act, essentially, but just without an emergency. It seems to me that this court could have deployed the exact same arguments, because the only issue is we just don't think you should be doing this.
Yeah, that's my read on it. I think that people who were skeptical of the HEROES Act as the basis were convinced that it gave the court an angle to attack it. You know, you all of a sudden they have this additional argument, the emergency argument, and I think that was a little bit misguided as a critique, because they don't need the emergency argument. All they need to say is, well, this statute isn't specific enough. It doesn't specifically say that you can forgive these loans in X amount or whatever, and therefore it's not adequately clear as a statute, and the Department of Education doesn't have this authority. That's all they need, and I think they have that for the Higher Education Act too. So I don't think that it would have made a difference. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe there's some nuance in the statute that the conservatives would have been convinced by, but I doubt it.
Lastly, in the American Rescue Act of 2021, Congress also said that any student debt relief up until 2025 is considered non-taxable, essentially a service in kind that is non-taxable. I don't know what the phrasing would be, but isn't that also more indication that Congress completely contemplated this action, regardless of which authority the administration used, this action to take place? And because they didn't put a threshold on it, also basically conceded that it's up to the Department of Education to make this assessment.
I think that it does indicate that Congress contemplated it. And I also think that we don't even need to go that far, right? The entire purpose of the HEROES Act was to create a little bit of leeway for emergency situations when action was needed. And they didn't know what emergencies were going in 2003, what emergencies were going to develop over the course of the next quarter century or whatever. And so the breadth of the statute and the lack of specificity is a feature, not a bug. And the Supreme Court is treating it as if it were a bug, and sort of holding the broad nature of the statute, of the grant of authority to the executive branch, against it.
And last question on this, because the people need to understand. I mean, if this case goes down in the way that it appears that it's going to, like, it becomes increasingly hard to imagine what can be done in the future. For instance, if Congress has a will for a single-payer health insurance program, they're not going to sit there and work out, what are the payments going to be to this entity? What are the payments going to be? How are they going to calculate it this way? How are you going to go about doing it? They're going to write a statute, and this is the way that it's been done all the time. We're going to write a statute that has broad principles and broad ideas, maybe some specifics in certain areas, but we're going to leave it up to Health and Human Services, for instance, on how to execute these broad principles. And a case like this basically says that the court can go in and go, like, this is a big deal. You know, health insurance, it's 1/4 of the economy or whatever it is. Like, the agency can't figure these things out. You need Congress to do every one of these. How much are you going to charge for a hip replacement? How much? They're going to make it impossible to pass any programs like this?
Yeah, they've been using this major questions doctrine to attack some policies that are frankly not that big of a deal, right? They last year used it to go at an EPA policy that wasn't even in effect. So when it comes to a really, truly broad, welfare program, for example, I just can't see it surviving this court in any form, no matter how careful Congress is.
And let me ask you this too. I'm sorry. I mean, is that what they're doing? Like, in other words, these cases are important. You know, the fact that it was done under the emergency provision means that if you are a justice and you're worried, like, I don't want the government to be relieving debt in the future, they're not going to be able to do it in the future under that provision. But are they not just creating essentially a history of the use of this doctrine so that they can deploy it when they need it?
I think that's exactly what they're doing. They are consolidating power in themselves. And I think they are doing that with the knowledge and understanding that they're going to control the court for the next couple of decades, most likely. And this will be an effective tool against policies they don't like.
It's so effed up that I almost want to just not even talk about the other cases. Honestly, it's just, it is just so effed up. And it was predictable. I mean, it was sort of predictable. I mean, these guys have been going there for a whole time. We can get to 2:30 in a second. The court also, just because this has to do with this as well on some level, the court accepted to hear a case as to the constitutionality of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Yeah. And they're arguing it's under, and we don't know what the court feels about it, but the lower court said, because this is funded in a way that is unique, but specially unique, right? Because we have unique funding for agencies, but this is unique-y, I guess. Will you explain why this is even a case?
I'm not entirely sure that I can answer why it's a case, but I can tell you what the Fifth Circuit said. Yes. So the CFPB is funded through the Federal Reserve. The Fed gets its funding from bank fees primarily, and then what Congress did with the CFPB was say, well, you make a request for your budget to the Fed, which sort of ties the CFPB to the banks that it's largely regulating and keeps it insulated from certain political maneuvering. So the CFPB will make a request to the Fed. It's capped based on certain operating expenses of the Fed and inflation. And then the Fed writes it a check.
And we should say that mechanism, the idea with that is that it's done so because it's supposed to sort of somewhat reflect the size of the banking industry, right? It's as the banking industry grows, the budget for the CFPB can grow. As the banking industry contracts, it won't. The CFPB can contract.
Right. And yeah, I mean, the Fifth Circuit has basically put out what I think is an oddly vague decision, saying that this is unconstitutional under the Appropriations Clause, which the Appropriations Clause just says, no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. So the Fifth Circuit's position is whatever this is, it's not an appropriation. Now, why they think that is genuinely unclear, even if you read the decision. It seems to me that what they're saying is this is so weird, so unlike any other agency, that it's not an appropriation. But it's at no point did they say, here's the sort of dispositive element that makes this not an appropriation. They just sort of go through the various unique features of it, and it is a relatively unique funding structure. So they're sort of correct in that sense. But then they make this odd leap to saying, well, it's not an appropriation, which the CFPB basically responded saying, Congress passed a law. It provides for an amount of money. It caps that amount of money. It provides for where the money comes from. What else do you want here, right? The Government Accountability Office has definitions of an appropriation that seem to match what they're doing. The Supreme Court has never held that appropriations can't take a form like this or even come close to holding that. So it seems to me like the Fifth Circuit was just taking a swing. Let's see where we can go with this. And I've learned my lesson about saying things like this won't work. So I'm not going to say it, but it did immediately hit me as a little bit absurd. And it would be tough for the court to create a rule that just took out the CFPB without taking out a whole host of agencies along with it, which they might not be afraid of.
Right. And is it an appropriation from Treasury?
So the Constitution says no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. So that's all we have. It depends how broadly you want to read an appropriation, how broadly you want to read the term Treasury, right? Are we just talking about all the funds in the government's possession, or are we talking about something specific? So I think it really just feels like fun with definitions that the Fifth Circuit is having here. Basically saying, well, what is an appropriation? And that's a question that the Supreme Court has never really tackled head on.
And why do you think the Supreme Court took this? Is it just the Fifth Circuit wouldn't be determinative, right? I mean, the Fifth Circuit doesn't have the ability to shut down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, do they?
I mean, they can certainly. What they have claimed is that this is targeted towards this one 2017 rule and is not a broad swipe at the CFPB. What they have done is now create precedent that could be used to attack the CFPB as a whole. If this ruling were upheld by the Supreme Court, CFPB rules would be null. They wouldn't be able to pass any more. So it would be functionally not there. So as it stands, the Fifth Circuit's position is, well, this is just this one rule. But if we were to accept this precedent, it could be used to attack every CFPB rule. The Supreme Court will intervene before the Fifth Circuit gets to do that. As to why the Supreme Court took it, I think the optimistic view is that they were like, well, come on,
let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this, and you guys in the Fifth Circuit need to just chill a little bit.
Yeah. The pessimistic view is that they were sort of like, well, this looks like fun, let's take a swing at one of the newest federal agencies, like Liz Warren's pet project or whatever, and see what sort of damage we can do to their ability to
ever since Alito said that thing about Indian heritage, it's not inconceivable to me that he's just like, let's mess with her a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. Lastly, Section 230. This was argued in late February. This is a section of the 1996 Communications Act, maybe? I think
Communications Decency Act. Yeah.
Communications Decency Act. Section 230 basically says that if you are a website, not a publisher, but a platform, that you don't have civil liability for stuff that gets posted onto that site. You may want to police it because of advertising and what people say, cancel culture, I guess. But you don't have any civil liability. I personally think that Congress needs to revisit this, not necessarily eliminate it, but we need to tweak this thing. But this case is not going to be helpful in that respect, is it?
It doesn't look like it. What this case is about is ISIS, right? The case is brought by the estate of a U.S. citizen who was killed by ISIS in the Paris attacks in 2015. And what they're arguing is that Google, which owns YouTube, of course, should be liable under anti-terrorism laws for the role that the YouTube recommendation algorithm plays in radicalizing terrorists. So as much as Section 230 has become sort of a weird culture war proxy fight, there's an interesting legal question here about whether these types of algorithms that now dominate the internet, where they fit into the Section 230 scheme, right? Because the Section 230 scheme, like you mentioned, is 1996. It was designed really with like old school message boards in mind, right? And that's, so you have a website who plays a very passive role, and users are just posting in chronological order on the site. And whatever you think about, social media websites and what their role is and what their liability should be, it's certainly different than that, right? They have these algorithms that are not quite passive.
And we should say these algorithms are, at their essence, are developed to make money.
Right.
They are there basically saying it is, and this is the thing, this is the analogy in my mind, is that there was a story, I think it was in ProPublica, about landlords raising their rents. And basically there is an attempt to say there's some collusion going on because some company put out basically an algorithm which told people how to raise, all of the landlords to raise their rents. And there's some price collusion going on. If you or I were a business consultant, and I said like, look, I'm talking to everybody and we're all going to raise our rents. If we all know we're using the algorithm that's telling us to raise the rents, there's really not that much of a difference. And so the algorithm is not just some rando thing that feeds up stuff based upon what you want. It's feeding stuff up so that these companies can make more money. And on some level, it's the same thing of like when I put this story in the right-hand column because I want to sell papers type of thing.
Right. Yeah. And I actually think that's sort of Google's best argument, right? Is that they're going to make this argument that to some degree the algorithm is content neutral, in that it is just promoting what it thinks the user wants to see, whatever that might be. And sometimes it's something awful. They hope it's not, but so be it. They are sort of in a passive position here, similar to the message board host or whoever. It was very clear at the court that they didn't know what to do with this. You're deep in, almost philosophical questions about what an algorithm is and, whether one can be neutral, et cetera. They were in way over their heads. I got the general sense that the conservatives had a sort of dog who caught the car vibe during these arguments. A lot of the conservative complaints about Section 230 sort of grow out of this sense that they are treated unfairly on tech platforms, that they are over moderated relative to liberals or whatever. And so there's been sort of a push on the right that migrated into the legal movement to attack Section 230. And then they, I think, thought they found a compelling hook in these ISIS cases, because you're no longer talking about something petty. Right. You're talking about something that really is a social concern. And then it gets to the court, and they're pretty plainly over their heads. I mean, almost none of them have any real grasp of how these algorithms function, what kind of rules you could pass to make them function differently, if that's even a possibility. You had Brett Kavanaugh talking about the economic cost of trying to do something here. I think they realize that they're in over their heads. So I would sort of expect them to punt on this one, although you never know.
Right. All right. Well, Peter Shamshiri, Law Boy on Twitter and co-host of the 5-4 podcast. Thanks so much for your time today. I think, the bottom line is the student debt issue is not only going to have implications for the 40 some odd million people who were hoping to get some type of student debt relief, and then all the knock-on impacts it would have on our economy in a positive way, but also it's going to have real implications for even more ambitious legislation if we're ever in a position to pass it. And it's a crap show.
It is. Thanks for having me, Sam. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Peter. Appreciate it. All right, folks. We went long today, but I couldn't help it. I knew I was going to. I mean, that, this Chevron doctrine stuff has been something that I've been talking about for 6-7 years, seeing this come down the pike, and 8 years, and now 9 years, actually. And now the pike is, we've gone from Ted Williams Tunnel all the way out to Lee, Massachusetts on the pike, as it were. Do people say it's something coming down the pike not from Massachusetts? Yeah. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah, but I feel like I always heard it as coming down the pipe, and then later had to realize, they're saying pike, and then I don't really have a reference for what a pike is.
The turnpike.
We don't really have turnpikes in North Dakota.
All right.
It's like a few interstates.
Okay. Ben says, Sam, I think you're slightly misstating what the major questions doctrine is. The idea is that an agency should not be able to decide a question of major importance if their statutory mandate does not clearly say so. Congress does not hide elephants in mouse holes, is the line the conservative justices use. I don't know how more clearly you can get than the Secretary of Education has the authority to do this. To get rid of debt. Yeah, because you can't write legislation in a way that's going to satisfy the conservative interpretation of what clear legislation is.
I mean, just like how they had to say, they say elephants and mouse, that's all, that's not technical language.
Let me get the specific, okay. The HEROES Act says that the Secretary of Education can waive or modify any type of obligations, liens, whatever, as the Secretary deems necessary in connection with a war or other military operation or national emergency. Again, they didn't question the national emergency. The Higher Education Act of 1965 allows the Department of Education to, quote, enforce, pay, compromise, waive, or release any right, title, claim, lien, or demand, however acquired, including any equity or any right of redemption. In other words, they can waive, they can release you from obligations of payment of loans, which is a claim or a lien or a demand, an IOU, etc. Unless it said you can waive $10,000, but Congress is never going to pass bills like that because it's too complicated. They don't know. They don't have the capacity to study these things. That's what's going on here. They play a game that we're not saying that you have to jump over. We're just saying you need to, cross the finish line. But they also know to cross the finish line, you need to swim a moat full of alligators. You need to, climb a 100-story building. That's just not the way that legislation works in a country of 300 million people. All right. Sorry, dude. I didn't mean to get so uptight about this. I'm pissed. All these freaking morons who are like, you want broad social change. They're just laying the groundwork to prevent that from happening.
And it's always that's what the courts have always been. It's a conspiracy against change.
Yeah. I mean, there was an era of the court that it wasn't that way. But part of it was
by design it was that way.
Yeah. And the era in that court that was literally a threat to reconstitute the court.
Yeah, you hear Nixon talking about the Warren court on the Nixon tapes, and with Ronald Reagan, it's all like that was we need to not let that happen again.
Exactly. you had about 40 years. Also, part of that same era where you had the Great Compression and you had high taxes, you just had a different regime in this country. Folks, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Get your phones ready because we're using our QR code today. Your support allows me to indulge myself and talk about these legal cases and go an hour, half hour. In fact, I looked at our YouTube channel video, which is now 11 years old and 10 years old. I think we got to update that. But the show used to be an hour and a half. There's mission creep. So support this mission creep, folks. You keep another 5 years, the show's gonna be like 7 hours long.
Maybe Feldman levels.
And this is not, like the young people out there on Twitch, they're going like, what do you call it? Son, he's on for 7 hours. But I mean, it isn't, it's not a show. For half the time, it's just like sitting there, like reading at the, thing. He's just hanging. It's the Truman Show. Your support makes this show possible. You can help us survive and thrive by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the free half free of commercials, you also get the fun half. And you also get to I Am the Show through our app at majorityapp.com. Also, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. They were a big part of the Madison protest. They gave free coffee to people back in 2010 when Scott Walker was pushing its assault on unions and on healthcare there. Check them out. Great company, great coffee. Get the MR blend. Do yourself a favor. ESVN. Bradley, what do we got? Is Emma going to come in? Oh, no, it's tomorrow.
Yeah, so we had our show on Monday that Emma recapped yesterday, mostly covering the NHL and NFL NHL trade deadline, but the NFL franchise tag deadline expiring on Monday. Derek Carr going to the Saints, as well as a few other topics. But we probably aren't recording tomorrow, but we will be back on Monday. So youtube.com/ESVN show if you weren't able to catch it on Monday.
Matt. It's a new era on the show, folks.
I've got a new soundboard. But last night we had Thomas Kennedy on to talk about DeSantis, a number of the bills, including recently announced one whereas penalizing people, for instance, if they have an undocumented person in their vehicle and they're driving. And some other stuff, as well as talking about Charles Murray and the sort of genetic and environmental determinists that try to take space from people who want to historicize and put things into a class construct. So patreon.com/leftreckoning to get that. We talk about Marianne Williamson in the postgame.
Rob from Dedham, Massachusetts, writes, down the pike has been in use since the early 1900s. So unfortunately, it's unlikely that it comes from Mass. But we have many other great sayings that come from Mass, like wicked, pissa, bubbla, frap, packy, sella, bang a Yui. I would add to that.
We say
also,
flip a Yui. And,
grinder, not the app, but rather what we eat, as it were. But it's also quite possible that in the 1900s, we still had the Mass Turnpike.
And it was just, because like a turnpike, a pike, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think a pike is like a pole with signs on it pointing you different directions.
I have no idea.
For turns. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
We'll figure that out, maybe, and come back and get back to you, folks.
What can you do with this information? Whether or not it's true is not what matters. Though it does play a role.
I love that. Because you keep thinking like each statement in and of itself is so dumb. But then he follows it up. All right, we'll see you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
We bring back DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back, ladies and gentlemen. Sam Seder, fun half. Emma out today. This just breaking, thickly settled. Also, apparently, a Massachusetts only street sign. I didn't realize that. I mean, I thought everybody knew what thickly settled meant. It means like there's housing congestion and slow down to 30 miles an hour, dude. So somebody else said it's bust a Yui. And also somebody said that a pike is like a spear. It's what they used to call a highway before they called it a highway. And Sam, Route 2 in Massachusetts, also known as the Old Boston Turnpike. And so it's possible that, like, who's coming? Who's coming? Well, James Ogletree is coming from down the pike to come to Boston. I don't know. He's coming down the pike. I would be careful.
Back in like Cotton Mather days.
Yes, yeah, quite. All right, let's get to this since we're sort of touching on history. The other day, I said that the reason why Michael Knowles, guys like Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh, and also, frankly, Ben Shapiro, even though it's they're talking about their anti-trans people stance. Had to do with also, and Michael Knowles was quite explicit about this. He didn't like it when conservatives allowed feminism to exist. He didn't like it with gay marriage existing. He didn't like it with, he didn't say this explicitly, but I have no doubt he doesn't like all the religious precepts that have been rolled back, like anti-miscegenation laws and slavery, which was justified by religion, and on and on. And my contention was he was a theocrat. Matt Walsh has been called a theocrat on this program. He's denied it, even though his politics are almost identical to Michael
he
Knowles.
also has theocratic fascist, ironically, in his Twitter bio.
Yes. They don't want you to understand them as theocrats, because when you do understand them as theocrats, you realize that everything that is said about the mullahs in Iran, everything that is said about the fundamentalists in Israel who are driving half the population of Israeli Jews out of the country even. They don't want you to understand that they're theocrats because they want to pretend that they're actually like paying some homage to the idea of a constitution. And they are so desperate to make you not understand that they are theocrats, even though they're telling you in the same breath that they are, that they will twist some of the most basic like principles and sort of historical facts. Here's Michael Knowles explaining that the divine right of kings, which was a concept developed in the 1500s, I think it was, or the 1600s, somewhere around there, around the Reformation, when the English were like, we're not going to listen to the Pope anymore. So where are we going to get our authority to rule? Well, we're direct line from God. I am the king. Why am I the king? Because God put me here.
Yep.
And here is Michael Knowles trying to sort of like fiddle with this. That actually, the fact that someone could be a dictator, essentially, and doom people to death or not death or whatever it is, up or down, that's not the whole point of a divine right. It's actually the fact that God appointed them dictator is what actually inhibits their being a bad dictator.
It's actually checks and balances.
Exactly.
The libs fear that if politicians believe in God, that's going to cause them to do all manner of terrible things. If you think that the...
Pause it. Incidentally, I will tell you that there has never been a lib in this country who has voted for a winning presidential candidate that didn't believe in God. So they're like a big fear that you're going to believe in God. That's ridiculous. The question is whether they get their authority from God, whether they are governing us because they say, God has told me what needs to happen, and that's what I'm doing.
And you just have to listen to it because of that.
Because of that. But so go back. So understand like where he's playing with things because he doesn't want you to know he is a theocrat.
The libs fear that if politicians believe in God, that's going to cause them to do all manner of terrible things. If you think that the God-fearing politicians are bad, just wait until you see the politicians who don't fear God. This is a way, it's kind of obscured in the history now, but we all make fun of divine right monarchy as this sort of absurd idea, and we view divine right monarchs as being absolute tyrants wielding, but that isn't true. The idea of divine right monarchy is actually that there is a limit on the power of the monarch because the monarch is answerable to God, who is a lot more important and powerful than a politician who is answerable only to the people or answerable only to a small group, say in an oligarchy. This is the meaning of John Adams's famous statement, the Constitution is built for a moral and religious people. That's the constraint. When you take that constraint away in the name of the separation of church and state or the enlightened views of secularism, and when you take that away, you're going to lose the grace, you're going to lose the restraints, you're going to lose the kiss it up for vengeance is the Lord's, and you're going to get a lot of wrath and gluttony and pride and lust and all the rest of it. You're going to get a country burned.
All right.
I mean, Charles I might have something to say about lust and wrath and stuff like that.
And in
Turned out
fact,
well for him.
Charles I, let's be clear, Charles I was one of the OG divine right guys.
Yeah. New Church of England, like I'm in charge of all this stuff now.
I mean, it was almost developed for him. I think it was was it developed?
James, I think.
It was James.
Yeah.
He was like the second or third, I think, who got there because of the divine right.
Because of Henry VIII, ultimately.
They cut him. As far as I remember, they cut his head off because he was so.
Was it God that cut his head off, or was it people?
You know, that's the interesting thing. We are to believe that the constraint upon, and what did he call it? Absolute tyrant?
Absolute tyranny.
Yeah, that's another thing that's sort of ironic.
That word comes from that.
The guy who came up, the Catholic guy, right? There was a Catholic guy, Jacques Bousset. I'm probably butchering his name. Jacques Bousset came up with the idea of the divine right of kings because he was trying to sort of he was working for the king, incidentally. And he was Catholic, and he was trying to sort of maintain some peace between the papacy and the Protestants. And the other great innovation he came up with, besides the divine right of kings, right? God says it's okay for this guy to be king here. And that's why people have to listen, incidentally.
For instance, draining your marshland, and that's really upsetting you. Well, God said he should do it.
God said he should do it. And even though the Pope might disagree, God has a direct line to these guys too. The other thing he came up with was this concept of political absolutism, which is basically a tyrant, dictator. That's the best way to run a government. One central power, period. Not these councils of clans and stuff like that. And he wants you to believe that God is the ultimate arbiter of what a politician can or cannot do. Not democracy, not laws. Because he's basically saying democracy and laws are irrelevant. Mm-hmm. The only thing that constrains a politician is God. And so, therefore, and as a bonus, because God is the constraint on these politicians, we also threw in that part about everything the politician does that God has told him to do is right. They do not want civil laws. They do not want citizens. They do not want democracy. They don't want culture that is derived by people saying any form of equality or legitimacy that exists, even if they're different from the people who have maintained power for decades or centuries or millennium. They don't want that. They want God's word to dictate. Period. End of story. So he's literally rewriting what the divine right of kings are about. The main emphasis is just they were constrained by God. As opposed to whom? As opposed to whom? You got to believe in God to be constrained by God? That seems like a sort of a weak balance, checks and balances.
Yeah.
What's going to keep someone from saying, I believe in God, I'm God-fearing, fearing? What's going to keep them from lying? Well, if God's going to strike them down, why can't God strike down the people who are not God-fearing? Why won't those people be just as constrained by the God-fearing people? Either God is a punishing God or he's not. And I do mean he in Knowles' construction. They're theocrats. They're pushing a political ideology. Well, they are. It's theocracy. They're not even like, I saw this Reason magazine piece actually, that even at CPAC, nobody's even talking about libertarian economics anymore. The conservative movement is a religious fundamentalist movement. And on some areas, they will extend it to sort of just purely cultural thing, like guns, although they probably justify it on the religious grounds in some measure anyways, right? Because we have to fight off the evil that's coming and the Satanists. But everything else, understand, the conservative movement is religious fundamentalism. The distinction has been all but removed. They just understand they have to put it in different clothing when they roll it out in front of people who don't subscribe to the idea of a theocracy. I mean, that's it.
And then to act like he's the one furthering the tradition by citing John Adams or something like that. Meanwhile, like the entire history of like, especially those hundreds of years were those people realizing like, yeah, we can't deal with monarchies. That this is something we need to put behind us historically.
What was the treaty? There was a treaty about that had to do with piracy. Maybe it was it the Moorish agreements? John Adams, I think, specifically wrote in there, we are not a Christian country.
The Barbary Pirates.
Yeah.
Or is it the Treaty of Tripoli?
That's what it was. The Treaty of Tripoli.
Was that Adams or Jefferson?
Looks like Adams here, at least.
Yeah.
Per Wikipedia.
See if you can pull up the Treaty of Tripoli. Specifically says, John Adams says,
1797 Treaty of Tripoli declares that the government of the United States
quote,
of America...
The government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. I don't know. You could interpret that in different ways.
And even the quote cited by Knowles is talking about the populace, which is like more frankly paternalistic, like as opposed to a sort of requirement for the leadership.
Article 11, the Treaty of Tripoli, signed by John Adams, correct? Yeah. Again, the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. Religious people might be nice. Some of them are. Religion may help some people be nice and benevolent.
Signed that in 1797.
But religious people can also not be nice. Bishop Desmond Tutu came into studio back in the early days of... was he in studio? Maybe he was. I can't remember. But we interviewed him, Janine and I. And he said religion is like a knife. You can use it to spread butter. You can use it to stab somebody. But there are theocracies you can go to. But this is not one of them, despite Michael Knowles' desire. Conservative-minded virus, Oregon narrowly passed a measure last election that included the right to affordable health care in its constitution. Messaging wasn't very clear, so it was close, but it could be helpful to have someone talk about why this was an important win and what it means. NJ Mailman, wait, you're telling me all the cutting of the defense budget talk about GOP members and held up by dumb left was all BS? Surprise, surprise. Indeed. Train better, feel better. Emma, looking forward to this Dudes Rock edition of Majority Report. Skippy, what would it mean to mock Sam Bagenstos for his silly name? Sam Bagenstos came on the program years ago. He works in the Biden administration now, but he ran for Michigan State Supreme Court, and he came on to talk about his time in the DOJ, both in the Clinton administration and in the Obama administration, and what had happened to it in the meantime during the Bush years. I cannot remember when that interview was. Maybe it was in January of 2017. That's my guess. Oklahoma sounds like an ailment that you definitely don't want. Jeff, be sure to ask Loy Boy about how he got fired for being too good at podcasting. Oh, I didn't know that. Fruity Dinosaur, just wondering if you guys heard anything about Nick Fuentes' new Nazi rally around CPAC over the weekend. I watched it on Twitch through a streamer, but it was pretty chilling stuff. I work for the Milwaukee elections, and without getting too specific, I can tell you that University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee's district had one of the highest turnouts in the city as far as I saw on the ground in terms of younger turnout in the primary. Tomo of Link, happy Friends Day Wednesday, folks. Hope Emma's okay. Here in Britain, the preparations are ongoing for the day when we give the King and Queen consort some hats full of stolen diamonds. It's also getting more and more ridiculous by the day. Also, did you know that during the state of opening of Parliament, the hat full of stolen diamonds arrives in its own car? Laugh out loud. I did not know that. As it were, can you further explain the direct connection of how raising interest rates causes job loss? Thank you. Oh, wait, there it is. Ha, you just said it. Thank you. So many jobs are based on companies' ability to take out loans. Certainly all the tech stuff. The reason why you're seeing a huge amount of tech stuff is because they don't have the cash flow.
Right. And like that is like, this is a problem that we're letting so much of our economic health trusted to the Fed, because what we did post the financial crisis was just pump these industries full of cash, and then you get crypto and Facebook and Uber and shit.
Yes. You raise loans, you also make it much more expensive to buy a house. You make it much more expensive. The cost of money goes up, and that cost ends up basically making it harder for people to expand, to hire new people. You got to lay off maybe to pay off some of your debt. Business loans do not have a 30-year mortgage. They're not fixed. They will basically, a lot of your business loans are tied to the prime rate. Prime rate goes up as the Fed raises its rates. Your loans go up, things get more expensive. And again, because your car loan is more expensive, your mortgage, if you're buying a house, is more expensive. Maybe your credit card rates are more expensive. That means you can spend less. So if I own a business, I got consumers who are feeling the squeeze. They can't spend as much. And I have less of ability to invest in capital improvements, hire people, whatever it is, because what were fixed costs for me have now gone up. And can continue to go up. I don't know. Professional dumpster fire. I keep thinking about Kowalski's IM yesterday. Reduction of SNAP and Medicaid is to reduce demand for necessities by forcing people to starve. I heard it on 2 other podcasts now. Make sure to call your reps about the farm bill. I feel like the windfall profits taxes would work, but that would hurt the feelings of some very wealthy donors. Sam explaining CNC is akin to the internet being a series of tubes. Yes. Well, and the other thing is that, you know what else contributes to inflation? When you spend money on, or presumably, let's put it this way, you're spending money on defense. Now, I don't believe that the reason why we're experiencing inflation significantly has to do with an overheated economy or a lack of productive capacity in society. We do have a lack of productive ability, but that is a function, again, of us simply recovering from the pandemic. And I think that we're starting to see that, the reason why you're seeing inflation slow is because things are coming back online. And we're slowly sort of reorienting to different sort of lifestyles and demands that people have, et cetera, et cetera. But when the Fed raises the interest rates on the monetary side and on the fiscal side, we're pumping money almost exclusively at this point, not into the hands of people. Cutting back on SNAP, cutting back on healthcare, both in terms of like health insurance, Medicaid, and in terms of, free COVID protections, etc. We're taking money out of the hands of people. So they're going to have less money to spend on daily products because a rich man buys only one loaf of bread at a time, just like a poor man. That's the saying that goes. But at the same time, we're pouring billions of dollars into the military-industrial complex. Now, it's not an either-or situation, but they're making it one. It doesn't have to be. I don't think we need to cut the deficit, but they're making it. All it's doing is increasing wealth disparity, and it's like any impact that the Fed does. All it's doing is making sure that impact is more surgically tied to the non-defense industry. They don't give a shit if the interest rates are going up, if they're getting billions of dollars more to do more programs. Between the 101 and the 5, Richard Wolff talks about how the Fed hikes are also, and not insignificantly so, about attacking non-domestic borrowers economically. In other words, when the Fed hikes interest rates, other countries who have borrowed U.S. dollars actually owe us more. So it is effectively economic warfare on the global South and other countries. I think there's some truth to that. I don't know exactly how it impacts our borrowers. Pete from Tucson, if they think the economy requires 6+% unemployment, surely they should also advocate for social safety nets for the 2 million unemployed people. But of course, that would be fiscally irresponsible. Indeed. District Jabroni, I'm not going to pretend to understand the Fed, but it sounds like they have one tool for every situation, and it's interest rate changes. That's it. Yeah, of course. I want to blame Congress even more for inflation by allowing companies to monopolize and doing nothing to stop the corporate price gouging. Yes. Between the 91 and the Route 5, the Fed claims they're addressing unemployment part of their dual mandate by hiring some community organizers to run workforce grant programs, if that means anything compared to their monetary policy. They don't really make that argument, do they? The bestest leftist. Hey, I'm our crew. My father, Mike Bryant, passed yesterday. Could I get a shofar? I'd like to tell a brief story of his life regarding corporations. We lived in Maine, and he worked for a paper mill, first as a union worker and then for corporate offices. They moved some of their operations overseas. My dad used to combine different jobs as well as negotiate a lot of layoffs. He always looked out for the workers and was a great middleman for both. However, the corporation shafted him after many years of doing their dirty work. They actually found some BS reason to fire him right before he was to hit a milestone and get an increase in pay. Vacation time, benefits, and pension. He was 63 and it badly damaged his and my mother's retirement plans. He went back to school and took on student debt, was never hired by another company. Instead, he worked as an Uber driver until the day he died. F corporations, love you all, left is best. I'm sorry about that. That's horrible. That's horrible. No protection for workers. The idea that you can fire somebody, I mean, we should have laws in this country that say that after 10 years, let's say, you can't fire somebody without good cause. I mean, that's just off the top of my head. But the idea of at-will employment is highly problematic, particularly in a society where we don't have the support for people.
Yeah. Those two combined, that's the tyranny of the boss right there.
Because we had a situation where, like, you didn't have to pay for healthcare.
Housing was taken care of.
Housing's okay.
Education, all that stuff.
Baseline food.
Essentials aren't just trusted to the market. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then, okay, work's not so precious. Your job's not so precious.
Yeah.
that you're at the mercy of these people.
I've always felt the same way about cancel culture, like that John Ronson book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed. Like all of those situations, like some of those people need to be removed from those positions. And the tragedy is when you get removed from a position, you are thrown into deprivation in this country.
Right.
And if that wasn't the problem, then we could have a situation where like, okay, you tweeted that thing, you need to take a little bit of time and step back, but you're not going to be just thrown to the wolves for this.
Right. You're not going to lose your health care. Your kids aren't going to be, you're not going to be able to feel like your kids are, their survival is
You'll be
threatened.
good. Just go work on it.
Yep. Mr. Morale. I love how no modern conservatives are aware of the fact the first evangelical president we ever had was Jimmy Carter, a Democrat. When he was running for president, Christians would say Jimmy and Jesus share the same initials. He could save our nation. Treaty of Tripoli, right? Dixie Average. Sam, what percentage of inflation do you think could be directly attributed to companies simply increasing prices under the auspices of inflation itself? I'm not suggesting this is the only catalyst for inflation. Just feel like it feeds itself, without a doubt. And I would bet that it's more likely. I don't know. I wouldn't be able to put a figure on it. I can tell you this, that you had oil refineries not coming online specifically because why should we? All we're going to do is we're willing to sell a little less volume of gas. We'll sell 10% less gas. If we're getting 20% markup on it. Are you kidding? That's the dynamic. 5% less volume. 10% less volume. We're constrained. We don't have the ability to refine more oil because we're not going to put these refineries on. Because understand, during the early days of COVID, you shut these refineries down. You fire everybody. Or you put them on leave. Or you don't invest in maintaining quality control. Because it's going to cost you money and now you don't have any revenue because nobody's driving. And then when it's time to put them back online, they're like, well, actually, we're just going to put 2 instead of 3 online. And we're going to refine, we can up the capacity of the 2 so that we're only refining at 90% levels, let's say. I mean, I'm making these numbers up, but this is the dynamic. 90% levels. But we're charging 150% more than we did before. There's the recipe, folks. Carpe Donnelly. I'm curious what the Fed's reaction will be when 2 million people are out of work and inflation continues rising. 1, 2, 3. Econ classes teach price controls as a horrible failure of inefficiency.
Econ classes are a horrible failure in teaching people how to understand the economy.
Market is inefficient. Well, I don't know what to tell you. Why? How do you shave the bottom corners of your mouth? Have I been trimming around my beard wrong my whole life? Yeah, I mean, I just try and clean it up on the sides here. That's all. I'm not doing a lot of shaving. That's the point. Militant apathy. Please help me understand how the Republicans are arguing that the train derailments are because of diversity. I know it's racist bullshit, but I don't get the correlation they're trying to make. Since the Boogaloo Boys are ready to go to war and avenge a criminal president, I would suggest the FBI start recruiting agents from more diverse backgrounds. I don't know that story, but I'll check that one out. Let's go to that sound. This is nuts. It's almost as if because the Republicans couldn't find any woke stuff in the defense budget that they're going to increase in a record breaking way. It's not to let Biden off the hook. He's going to sign off on it without a doubt. But they're looking for wokeness wherever they can find it. And it's all just a lie. And part of this is has to do with the fact that Pete Buttigieg is gay. That's basically it. Pete Buttigieg is gay. He also happens to be somewhat incompetent. And for them, it's a field day because they can combine those two things. Do we have that sound? Don't we have sound to that effect? Yeah. Which number? Number 8. Okay. Yeah, here it is. This is Representative Mike Collins, Republican from Georgia, on the House floor, trying to make the argument that we're getting the train derailments because Norfolk Southern, remember, and all of these freight train companies are working on extremely thin margins of people who they're hire because it is a way for them to drive profits, have extremely low labor costs. That's why they won't even give them paid sick days. That's why you get punished if you have more than 4 or 5 sick days. But his argument is a novel one.
Consequences. After seeing another Norfolk Southern train derailed this weekend, I was reminded of the fact that the company wrote to shareholders stating that it is focused on DEI. This administration's focus on DEI is forcing private companies to rethink their goals, and one has to wonder, was Norfolk Southern's DEI policies are directing resources away from the important things like greasing wheel bearings?
Pause it for 1 second. Understand what he's saying here. He's the company has said, like, we are upholding standards of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a way of saying, like, we're covering our asses so that we don't get sued. We're trying to be a little bit less racist and a little bit less misogynist. And one of the ways we're doing that is by cutting down the amount of people that we staff on these trains so much that there's absolutely no friction between people. We don't even see them. 2 people on a mile-long train. But Mike Collins wants to make it. Are they spending too much money on programs like this and paying for safety? Well, if he genuinely believes that's a problem, he should introduce a bill forcing them to do safety. Increasing regulations on them safety. Will you pull up the text of the bill that Mike Collins offered to Congress to increase regulations to force these people to stop spending money on all these diversity parties that they're having, on wokeness and on safety regulations? Pull up that bill. Search around Google. There it is. All right, go back. Let's listen to his bullshit.
Consequences. After seeing another Norfolk Southern train derailed this weekend, I was reminded of the fact that the company wrote to shareholders stating that it is focused on DEI. This administration's focus on DEI is forcing private companies to rethink their goals.
No, it's not.
And one has to wonder, was Norfolk Southern's DEI policies are directing resources away from the important things like greasing wheel bearings? Y'all, this insanity must stop. Speaking of insanity, I'm completely out of my mind. Put the bill on the floor calling for increased regulation if you are so worried that these people are spending too much time with their wokeness. Do it. Well, that would be an infringement on free marketism. I don't want them to be woke, which is not infringement on free marketism, but I also would not require them to do safety things because that would be an infringement on free marketism. Such garbage.
It's the dumbest sort of like they talk about like the socialism of fools and like the idea that instead of like, I guess Jews now, it's like wokeness. Like these corporations, it's not to do anything with like the structure of capitalism and their incentives for like maintenance of things versus like, you know, running these things as ragged as they can. It's because they're trying to be too anti-racist. It's just wild that we have so many people believing that.
Insane. So this is fun news. Bernie Sanders has convinced Howard Schultz to come testify in front of the HELP committee, which he chairs in the Senate. It is, where the heck did I get that? I don't have my write-up on it. But here is Bernie Sanders announcing it. And let's see.
let us be very clear. In the United States of America, workers have the constitutional right to organize unions and engage in collective bargaining to improve their wages and their working conditions. Unfortunately, Starbucks, under Mr. Schultz's leadership, has done everything in their power to prevent that from happening. The National Labor Relations Board has issued over 80 complaints against Starbucks for violating federal labor law, and an administrative law judge in New York recently ruled that Starbucks has engaged in, quote, egregious and widespread misconduct, end quote, in a union organizing campaign.
Is he bringing in front of the HELP committee? What is that? The
Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. Yeah.
And on March 29th. So we're going to, I don't know, we may take some of that live. Yeah, we should. And Sanders wants to bring in like folks from Amazon.
He was also thinking the CEO of Moderna.
The CEO of Moderna for the price gouging that they're engaged in. He's going off on this. This is going to be his next 2-year project. And the thing that's going to be interesting about this, too, is Howard Schultz. Like, your first reaction is, oh, well, Howard Schultz isn't going to do anything. Like, what is Sanders doing getting Schultz? What difference is it going to make? But here's the thing. Schultz is coming in there with one of the largest sense that he is infallible relative to his fallibility that I think we're going to see in a long time in a committee hearing. This is not a guy who's going to come in and say all the right things. This is a guy who's going to come in who thinks that he knows better than Sanders. This is a guy who's coming in thinking, I'm going to embarrass Bernie Sanders. And this is a guy who literally paid millions of dollars for people to pitch to him, why don't you run on a solution that risks the imagination of a new kind of possibility? That is what one of the...
And maybe we need a solution to it that risks the imagination of a new kind of possibility.
And, to be clear, that was like Bill, what was that guy's name? Burton? Was that his name? Yeah. Bill Burton. Bill Burton and Steve Schmidt, was it? That got paid millions of dollars each to advise Howard Schultz on running for president. And Howard Schultz, his campaign flamed out immediately. And this is a guy who went in front of Starbucks workers when they first deployed him out to stop this union movement. And he was so convinced that he could do it. Starbucks is like a family. I'm reminded of the story from the Holocaust in the Warsaw Ghetto, where people were sharing blankets. And that's what we do here at Starbucks. And if you get a union, you're going to be not sharing blankets. It's going to be like being in the Holocaust without a blanket. I am looking forward to that committee hearing.
It's going to be awesome.
Because I got news for you. There is no one around Howard Schultz who is saying, you got to take this seriously because they could get at you. No one's saying that to him. No one's saying that to him. Howard Schultz thinks that he can go in there and he's gonna talk his way out of this. It's gonna be amazing.
And like I often think of like the pressure Howard Schultz feels from like his other sort of oligarchs to get his house in order with regards to like punishing their labor, because like I'm somebody, I didn't work for Starbucks, but I worked for Caribou Coffee, and I moved from Old Navy to Caribou Coffee because I liked like I guess the idea of like it seemed like a better job and maybe with better pay and better hours. Like this all has a wider effect than just Starbucks, I think.
Let's play the Tucker Carlson. It's interesting what's going on here with Tucker Carlson, because the Republicans in the Senate, in particular, are hammering Tucker Carlson. Simultaneously, we should say that there have been new revelations in the Dominion suit that show Tucker Carlson, hates Donald Trump. He's a fraud. The guy's a fraud. I mean, he can hate Donald Trump, and I may personally hate Joe Biden, but still can speak well of his policies or ill of his policies. I mean, that's fine. But Tucker Carlson's a fraud. Everybody knows it. Let's just start with Kevin McCarthy trying to justify giving access to all of the congressional video footage to Tucker Carlson, who picked moments where there was no violence, literally minutes of hundreds of hours of camera footage where there was no violence to prove nothing violent happened that day. Seth Meyer had a great joke where he showed a clip of from John Wick, that Keanu Reeves movie where John Wick is feeding his puppy and going like, "Don't tell me John Wick is a violent guy. He's feeding his puppy." So Kevin McCarthy now has really blundered into this because the Senate is pissed at him. Here's Kevin McCarthy trying to justify this stuff.
Because of the footage that you gave Tucker Carlson last night, he went on and said this was a mostly peaceful chaos, as he said. He downplayed Brian Sicknick's death, said it was not related to January 6th, said this was not an insurrection. Do you regret giving him this footage so he could whitewash the events of that day?
No, I said at the very beginning, transparency. And so what I wanted to produce for everybody is exactly what I said, that people could actually look at it and see what's gone on that day. So.
But Mr. Speaker, would you agree with his portrayal of what happened that day?
Look, each person can come up with their own conclusion, but what I just wanted to make sure is I had transparency.
Do you believe
because I know in CNN, I mean, I had here where you guys actually broke where we were. This was a secret location, Fort McLaren. I don't know if you got concerned by that. I don't even know from point of view of security if we could ever be taken there again. But when you broke that at CNN, that was a real concern to a lot of people. I had a real concern also when I wanted to make sure transparency. Look, the officer's death is tragic.
Okay, and incidentally, the Capitol Police basically said this was a horrific thing to do. Mitch McConnell, rank and file Republican senators, also largely rejected Fox personality Tucker Carlson's vision of the deadly attempted insurrection as a mostly peaceful protest that involved little violence. McConnell said this. It was a mistake, in my view, for Fox News to depict it in a way that's completely at variance with what our chief law enforcement official here at the Capitol thinks. Senator Kevin Cramer,
North Dakota.
From North Dakota, Republican. To somehow put January 6th in the same category as a permitted peaceful protest is just a lie.
Wow.
That's pretty serious.
Not usually such an independent guy. But North Dakotans, I mean, in my anecdotal experience, weren't pleased by what they saw on January 6th, and most wanted to think it was Antifa
Mike
actually
Rounds.
staging something.
Mike Rounds, South Dakota. I was there on January 6th. I saw what happened. It was violence. It was an insurrection. These are the Republicans.
It's fascinating to see the cleave of the House and the Senate on this particular issue too. That like McCarthy, obviously the standard bearer for the House, still pretty ardently defending it, and then rank and file up to McConnell being like, "This is kind of nonsense that Fox is putting out there."
Yeah, can we just address the transparency claim?
Well, hold on one second. I want to get there. I'm going to get there. Manger, who is this, I guess, the Capitol Police guy. The most disturbing accusation from last night was our late friend colleague, Brian Sicknick's death had nothing to do with his actions on January 6th. Had Sicknick not fought valiantly for hours on the day he was violently assaulted, his Sicknick would not have died the next day. But let's talk about Senator John Neely Kennedy for Republican Louisiana. I was there on January 6th. It was not peaceful. It was an abomination. The idea that the Capitol Police served as tour guides for the QAnon shaman was outrageous and false, said Manger. Some Republicans have privately criticized the decision to give Carlson exclusive access to the footage. An irritated Representative Mike Turner, Ohio, Said, what would help the partisan tenor is if you actually interviewed us on why you invited us on your show, which is talk about my job and chairman. Okay, because he was pissed that he had to deal with this stuff. But here's the point. I just want you to think about this, regardless of where you are on like sort of like the, you know, the political spectrum. Is it right for McCarthy, who wants to have transparency about these tapes? I don't think that concept is necessarily bad. I think if you give an opportunity for like the Capitol Police to say like, we got to take this part out, we got to take that part out because this is really too sensitive. Maybe there are none of those. And we should release these tapes to the public. That's what transparency is. Mitt Romney has another idea of transparency. I can't forecast what Speaker McCarthy was thinking about, but if you're going to give footage, give it to all the networks, not just one.
Or just throw it online.
I think it's dangerous to suggest, the thing to do to suggest, well, the point is that transparency can take a couple of different forms. It could be like, we're going to give this to a bunch of reporters, like across the spectrum, all the networks, let's say. Or we're going to put it online and just make it the Smithsonian.
Open source. It's like the Nixon tapes.
Yeah, the Smithsonian. Whatever. But the concept of the Speaker of the House, who clearly has an agenda, giving it to one reporter or even a couple of reporters at that network, let's say, who clearly have an agenda, is messed up. It speaks poorly on Kevin McCarthy and his complete fabricated lie. It also speaks poorly on those reporters because obviously they're just cherry picking what is making their narrative. Now, if you see a parallel with other recent dumps of documents or information to a select few of ideological reporters, well, I think that's a fair comparison. And why it's both corrupt from the perspective of the person who wants a story being told and from the person who's telling the story. Because McCarthy's not giving footage to MSNBC or to Al Jazeera or to CNN or to One America Network or whatever it is. He's just giving it to Tucker Carlson. And guess what? Tucker Carlson has an agenda.
Yeah, the truth. Fighting wokeness.
Or just like an analog, like if it were, for example, Hakeem Jeffries instead, and giving it to Chris Hayes.
Honestly,
giving it to Lawrence,
would there be 30 seconds where people were like, are you kidding?
Giving it to Lawrence O'Donnell or something like that. Just some like take your pick. Like it would be front page news forever on the right. You know, it's
for decades. Also, another analogy, if Chris Hayes or let's say, Phil Griffin gave like an ad that was going to run from Republicans, from Donald Trump on MSNBC and gave it to the Biden campaign. I mean, are you kidding me? Or if, Chris Hayes was shown to be like, just imagine for a moment. Yeah, here it is. This is the email. Comes from the discovery from the Dominion suit. This is from, and we know it's from it's from
Rupert Murdoch to Jared Kushner. Below you start to go to bottom up.
Your advertisement, ADVA, at 1 p.m. this Sunday is an improvement. This is back, I think, when Fox owned. Did they still own Fox? Oh, they still own Fox Sports. 1 p.m. on this Sunday is going to be a football game. It's going to be a national ad. But Biden is in the same football is extremely good. Or I think so. We'll send it. Not even a hesitation. He's sending advances of ads that he thinks is really good. And maybe you want to counter this ad before it comes out.
Yeah, because in the September 24th one below. He says, Jared, know you were spending less on TV than Biden. However, my people tell me his ads are a lot better creatively than yours. Just passing by it on.
Yep.
Rupert.
On top of which, imagine, let's say, if since we're playing this if game, if that happened with MSNBC. Do we have like any? Oh yeah, here's some Brett Baer emails. Oh yeah. This is Brett Baer, the news guy on Fox. They called Arizona. I know you guys are feeling the pressure, but this situation is getting uncomfortable, really uncomfortable. I have to keep on defending this on air and ask questions about it, and it seems we're holding on for pride. I
know the confidence.
I know the confidence you say you had in the numbers, but it's at least within the realm of possible that he closes the gap now. This is how he's freaking out about Arizona. And to be clear, the guy was named Bill Salmon, who incidentally had a long history of being a propagandist for Fox, like attacking numbers like on climate change and a bunch of other things. Salmon said there's no doubt the gap may close, but there is absolutely no doubt that Biden's going to win Arizona. He subsequently was fired. And Brett Baer is going, it's hurting us. The sooner we pull it, even if it gives us a major egg, we put it back in his column, the better we are, in my opinion. He's showing an email from the viewers. This is the way they construct news there. Based upon, I mean, like when we're talking numbers, it's one thing like the tenor of it, they're attacking, don't attack Biden so much or be more anti-Trump. This is just straight on numbers from their news guy saying, can't we just fudge the numbers a little bit? Do we really have to be just so focused on the numbers?
Because it's making him like personally uncomfortable. He's like, I don't know what to say. I keep getting questions.
Let's go to more on that Dominion lawsuit. Tucker Carlson with an unidentified text recipient. So it's from 2021. He's super excited that Trump lost the election. All this stuff is redacted, incidentally. And there's really some question as to why. Because the things that you're supposed to be able to keep redacted in a lawsuit in Maryland are trade secrets, are financial secrets, and that's about it.
Yeah, I really.
And there is no justification for this, and you've got a couple of news agencies that are trying to get these redactions removed. But it's basically trying to save somebody from embarrassment. I would bet it's Murdoch. Tucker Carlson, that too. We are okay. We are very, very close to being able to ignore Trump most nights. And then somebody says, I truly can't wait.
I think that's him, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Somebody else says, I want nothing more. It does feel very close. Imagine things will get nice starting around mid-February.
Tucker Carlson, I hate him passionately. I blew up at Peter Navarro today in frustration. I actually like Peter.
I wonder what that was.
I can't handle much more of this. The guy says, but he might never leave. It would be hard to ignore if the Manhattan DA or New York AG announces charges on. Yeah, it's ridiculous that people are continuing this charade. Was he pushing the idea that Pence could solve this situation? It is ridiculous that people are pushing this charade, which is exactly what he went on to do night after night. In fact, until this very day.
It's really, yeah, and then goes and does charades.
Tucker Carlson, you understand, is a charlatan. He does not, and the thing is like, I don't care what my news person believes in their heart. But Tucker Carlson's capacity to lie is completely unrestrained, but for what he thinks will raise his profile, make him more famous. A lot of people like I saw Atrius on Twitter today. It was like, why has this guy's got so much money? And he's an heir to a
He had to begin with.
$1
right?
billion, $1 billion. I don't know. His stepmom, who I think is actually his mom, adopted mom, heir to the Swanson frozen foods fortune. Massive. He also, his real mom had, I guess, a lot of oil leases or something, and he sued with his brother to get a hold of those.
Carlson attended La Jolla Country Day School and grew up in a home overlooking La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club.
Well, to be fair, he was at that day school after he went to the one in Switzerland and then the one in Newport, Rhode Island.
Oh, yeah. Well, who amongst us?
Or before then, I should say. And then his parents were members of the Diamond Club at Trinity University, which is in the highest level of. But so the guy's got plenty of money. And Atrios was like, why does he keep doing this? And I think it was because his mother left him, and it left him with a sort of pathological desire to achieve fame and success. And he will stop at nothing. He will lie. He will lie.
And this is the guy who put Dan White Society in his yearbook.
Yep. Here he is complaining 2 years ago about the never-ending charade. This is on January 21st. The never-ending charade. Why are people pretending? Why are people engaging in the charade? Here he is, just 2 years later, still engaging in that charade.
And after looking at thousands of hours of footage, we came to the conclusion that many others have reached, which is the Capitol Police were not prepared for what happened. And that's fascinating when you think about it, because there was ample warning. The federal intel and law enforcement agencies knew perfectly well there could be a massive disturbance at the Capitol. But the frontline officers on duty that day didn't know. And yet the people who kept that information from the frontline officers who were overwhelmed by thousands of people milling around the Capitol building, the people who
milling
fell down
around
on the job, who didn't do their job, they were not punished. They were rewarded. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? Here we go.
They were rewarded. Oh, he's developing a conspiracy now that somehow they were encouraged to let this stuff happen. You know, there is a question as to why the military stayed in their barracks. There is a question why the National Guard wouldn't come out. We should dig into that.
Yeah.
There is a question why there were some FBI agents who refused to, who pretended. Remember, they never testified publicly. Remember, after there were sources at the FBI that said that, oh no, we didn't have to restrain Trump from driving our cars,
and we'll testify about it.
Except for we won't.
Yeah.
Here is my Exhibit A as to why Tucker Carlson is a charlatan. He understood 20 years ago on a book tour for his book, Politicians, Partisans, and Parasites. This is back when he wanted to be one of these guys who had integrity. Also, I know for a fact that he went out there and shilled for the Iraq War and didn't care one way or another. But he shilled for the Iraq War. It wasn't until like 2004, after the war and invasion had started, where he started to feel bad about it. Now, he didn't feel bad for the Iraqis. He went on in 2006 to go on a morning talk show and say, oh, I think they're just like monkeys. I don't care about them at all. He didn't care about the human life that was dead. He's not anti-war because it kills people. He's anti-war because it's a distraction to, immiserating people in this country. But here he is in 1999, I believe this is from, writing about, among other people, Bill O'Reilly. And he has a theory about Bill O'Reilly. And it's an interesting theory, and I think it was a valid one for him to have at that time. Listen to this.
Honest Clinton defender will say, yeah, the president didn't see terrorism in its proper context, didn't see it as important as it was.
Another quote from your book: Bill O'Reilly's success is built on the perception that he really is who he claims to be. If he ever gets caught out of character, it's over.
That's right. I say before that Bill O'Reilly's really talented. He's more talented than I am. He's got a lot more viewers than I do. He's a better communicator than I am. But I think there's kind of a deep phoniness at the center of his shtick. And again, as I say, the shtick is sort of built on this perception that he is the character he plays. He is every man. This kind of he's not right wing. He's a populist. This kind of Irish Catholic populist fighting for you against the powers that be. And that's great as a shtick. But I'm just saying, the moment that it's revealed not to be true, it's over. The moment he gets caught, slapping a flight attendant on the Concorde for not bringing his champagne fast enough, or barking at, one of his subordinates to take the, brown M&Ms out of my bowl and get me a bottle of Evian, or something like that. The second that makes Page 6, it's over, right? Because the whole thing is predicated on the fact that he is who he says he is. And just nobody is that person, especially not someone who makes $1 million, or many millions a year, as he does.
Okay. I don't think that's an unreasonable theory to have in 1999. The idea that Bill O'Reilly's going to be exposed. But what happened? Bill O'Reilly was never exposed as the phony that he is. He left Fox because there were millions of dollars of sexual harassment claims against him. Millions that were unresolved, I should say. Some were actually paid off, others that weren't. And I'm quite convinced that Tucker Carlson, who now portrays himself as an everyman fighting against the powers that be, realized at one point, maybe it was after he did Dances with the Stars. People forget how much in the wilderness he was, how desperate for celebrity and fame that he was, that he went on with Dancing with the Stars. I think he realized at one point, Bill O'Reilly never got caught because it's impossible to get caught, because they don't care. Because what he saw after this interview was Rush Limbaugh get arrested for being addicted to OxyContin, or arrested for trying to hide the $9,900 he was taking out of his bank accounts all the time to pay off his OxyContin dealer. A guy who had said for years that the drug addicts were weak and useless and morally repugnant. That's what Limbaugh said. And then all of a sudden he's revealed as an oxy addict to the point where he lost his hearing. Did not impact his relationship with his audience one iota. Tucker Carlson sees that. Tucker Carlson sees Bill O'Reilly get away with all of it. Tucker Carlson has Bill O'Reilly's old spot right now on Fox. Tucker Carlson learned a lesson. I can do this.
It's a mirror.
With impunity. I can do it with total impunity. I can lie. I can present fake news. And I will never get caught. And as long as I don't get caught, or as long as I don't sexually assault people around here, I am completely safe to do this as long as it drives revenue.
These hogs will eat the slop.
Absolutely. That's what he learned. He learned that lesson very, very well. He does not care. He does not care. He wants to be famous, because my guess is just that he never got over that issue with his mom leaving him. Not a nice thing to do.
I mean, I'd have to hear her side of the story.
I mean, maybe in retrospect, it looks like maybe there was some valid reasons. But that's the Tucker Carlson piece for the day. Pen Club member, CNC, computer numerical control. Thank you. Devin from Detroit. Is Peter on Lawboy because you got my email? Oh, Peter, no.
We've had him on before, haven't we?
Yeah. The Honorable Joseph Quiff, with the Fed continue to raise interest rates, forcing the inevitable recession, it might be a good exercise to bring on an MMT economist to combat the narrative from the traditionalists. That actually is probably a good point. All right. I'm going to do 8 of these, and then we're going to get out of here because it's already 2:45. I can't. Ben, Sam, I think you're slightly misstating with the. Oh no, okay, that doesn't count. I already read you before. Snarkavorsky, Many business loans have variable rates. Also, many are fixed. However, many business loans are just for a few years with a huge balloon payment at the end, which means refinancing then if the rate has gone up. Indeed. Matt's Hanna-Barbera sound effects are killing me. I cannot explain, but when Matt plays that sound effect, I get a vague mental image of him as Wally Gator. Custodial artist. It's pike the weapon used to kill rats because they thought the long pole saved them, but fleas would come down the pike. Not sure I follow
Sounds,
that.
I guess, plausible.
Matt's wrong. Along with the general building maintenance and cleaning up bathroom litter boxes, I also make sure we stay. It's in my contract. I don't follow what that is. Colin from Maryland. It's Busta Huey. Ace Square. Sam, happy belated birthday to Saul. Did you see the video of the people whose COVID benefits are being cut off in Kentucky lining up for food and pantry service? It's a disgrace. Talking about theocrats, did you hear Adams recently saying he does but not believe in church and state separation? Did not hear that. Jack from Boston. As a leftist with an econ degree, I don't think there is a problem with econ per se, as much as people are lazy with their understanding. If you walk away from an econ education thinking our economic system is not fundamentally broken, you miss something. How many more do I have? 4? Doubtful Furor from Jamaica. The slide whistle is really making my day. Tucker's in trouble. Trump doesn't forgive or forget. Leach. Looking forward to hearing from my Republican relatives who make $40K a year about Biden raising their taxes. Yeah, indeed. Ryan and Callie. Matt, it's pronounced La Jolla, not La Jolla.
Never seen it before, sorry.
Tucker is every entitled asshole with whom I went to prep school. All right, 2 more. Hugo's Burgers. I hear a lot of conservatives opt for a flat tax, but they never mention how the Social Security tax is not a flat tax. It's a regressive tax. Progressives want to change that to a flat tax. That is the moderate position. Any income over $160,000 is currently not taxed for Social Security. That's absurd. Left is best. Justice for Hugo. Jay Baggs. Sam, if SCOTUS laying the groundwork to end all student loan forgiveness doesn't piss you off enough, allow me to explain how taxpayers subsidize Ivy Plus schools, since even the richest, most prestigious schools are all officially nonprofits. Their donors enjoy gigantic tax breaks, up to 60% of AGI for cash gifts, and a waiving of capital gains taxes for gifts of stock. And the CARES Act made it 100% in 2020-21. Gifts to endowments can be wrapped up in trust and make even more money or avoid taxes on income and inheritance to family. One of the financial products we sell at the school north of Boston has a sales pitch that effectively, did you make too much money this year? And entails lending money to the university over decades while telling the IRS you gave it all away this year. Essentially, rich guys give their money to their other rich buddies to hide from the IRS, and the rest of us cover the gap or mortgage it on our grandkids. Yeah, we got to look into that. See if there's somebody writing about that. All right. Final IM of the day. Let's see. Matthew from Indianapolis. The story referenced about Republicans and diversity was an allusion to Secretary Pete's speech on diversity in construction, etc. They honed in on this and having ignored East Palestine for too long, while promoting identity politics and hiring rather than material support and policy making enforcement. Yeah, except for the problem is they're not in favor of more regulations either. Matt, Bradley, good job today. Emma's back tomorrow. See you then.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know.